Good afternoon. It is, we're back from our break this afternoon on February 25th in the House Transportation Committee, and we'll be taking up funding requests and legislative priorities. And Dave Roberts, who's the managing consultant for Drive Electric, has a presentation, and they'll be walking us through, telling us a little bit more about it. But welcome, Dave. Nice to see you again. And I'm not sure if you know everybody or not. If you want to go around real quick to do a quick introduction there, of new faces. But I'm Tim Corkin from Bennington.
Kate Lally from Shelburne. Molly Dirk Brattleboro.
Jim Casey, Hubbard.
Chris Keiser, Rutland City.
Candace White Waitsfield.
Ben Wells, Orleans County.
Bill Pouch, Heinsberg.
Nice to join you. So my name is Dave Roberts. I'm a managing consultant at the EIC. We're a Winooski-based nonprofit. We operate the Efficiency Vermont Energy Efficiency Utility, which is ratepayer funded, regulated by the Public Utility Commission. We also coordinate the Drive Electric Vermont program in partnership with the state of Vermont and many other folks across the state. So my agenda, I submitted a letter for the committee's consideration last week with funding requests. And so I'm here today to follow up on that, provide some more information on the work that the EIC is doing for Drive Electric Vermont, as well as some of the sort of nascent programs that Efficiency Vermont has been working on in the transportation realm. And I'm also here as a resource for you if I can answer any questions that have been coming up for the committee related to transportation electrification. So I do have some time sort of toward the end of my presentation with some industry updates and kind of future thoughts. Before I dive in, I just, welcome any upfront questions or thoughts so I can make sure I tailor my remarks. I have quite a few slides, so my intention is not to dwell on all of them, but to kind of run through some of them fairly quickly. I think some of the material you've been hearing. So, but before I dive in, anything folks want to?
I'm sure we will. Get us, we'll warm up here.
Yeah, get us
And I welcome, discussion as we go. So why do we care about transportation electrification? Why is there state policy supporting electric vehicles? So transportation is the single largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the state. It's also a significant cost for Vermonters. So the cost of traveling on gasoline is fairly expensive, especially for people living in more rural parts of the state. And on-road transportation is just under 70% of the total for transportation greenhouse gas emissions. So it's a significant contributor. Electric vehicles can offer significant reductions to those greenhouse gas emissions, even when you consider the battery manufacturing and the sort of full life cycle. There is a larger manufacturing footprint because of the battery materials, but the operating footprint is much lower. So in total, when you look sort of across all the life cycle, you reduce greenhouse gas emissions with an electric vehicle in Vermont by about 86%. It's still not as efficient as some of the other options that are out there in terms of reducing vehicle miles traveled. So certainly public transportation, walking and bicycling remain critical considerations for state policy. It's not our focus, but we do some work with e-bike initiatives and programs. But know that many other folks in Vermont are working on those sort of VMT reduction activities, vehicle miles traveled reduction activities. The Climate Action Plan does include several transportation mitigation pathways that we've supported through our Drive Electric Vermont work, both on the light duty, heavy duty, and sort of VMT reduction sides of things. So while we don't, we're a nonprofit, we're not a state entity, we're not responsible for the clean cars or clean trucks regulations. We did participate in the public meetings for those, had an information on the table. So folks who wanted to learn more about EVs to have that opportunity and do regularly provide an opportunity for folks at the state who are working on those programs to provide information to the broad sort of stakeholder industry folks who are involved in our Drive Electric work. We've supported the purchase incentive programs when they were active. We've done quite a bit around public charging infrastructure support. So again, we're not managing the funding. Right now, most of that is flowing through VTrans and the Agency of Commerce Community Development. I think you'll be hearing from them later this week on their work, but we do provide information in our resources and technical support, and have helped the state develop the statewide plans for charging, things of that sort. We do quite a bit of work around education and marketing. So we have a website I'll talk a little bit more about. And then on the heavy duty side, again, supporting some of the clean trucks activities, not responsible for the regulation itself, but just, providing support, including technical assistance for fleets who are looking to make a switch. Vermont has very ambitious goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and in the climate pathways follow-up plan that was done sort of into, how do we get to our Global Warming Solutions Act goals that are in the Climate Action Plan, the climate pathways called for 27,000 EVs by 2025, 126,000 by 2030. We're currently, just as of the latest data, just under 18,000 vehicles, including all electric and plug-in hybrids. So we've got, our work cut out for us, but we've come a long way in terms of, the work that's been happening. The Drive Electric Vermont program started back in 2012, and I think the first EV registration data that we worked with the state on, there were maybe 88 EVs. So we've come up a long way from 88 EVs to almost 18,000. So started this work in 2012 as a partnership between BIC and the state of Vermont. And I'll provide a little bit more information on some of the things that we're up to, but basically providing a forum for industry coordination, doing that marketing work, supporting incentives, business engagement, and charging infrastructure activities. On outreach and education, so we know there's a significant number of people who are maybe in the market for a vehicle or will be in the next couple of years, and they're already like, I'm going to get an EV, that's my next car, which is great, and recent surveys put that number maybe somewhere around 20% of people who are very likely to consider an EV for the next purchase. And then there's a large group of people who are maybe just not sure. They don't know enough about the technology, what the incentives are, what the costs involved are. And then there's about 20% of people that just aren't interested. Maybe they're traveling long distances. They need to tow. They just have other needs or interests, and an EV isn't for them. And we're sort of going after that 60-20, that 80% of people who are thinking about it, but maybe just aren't sure about a purchase. And we know from experience that just going for a ride in an EV can really change people's perception of the technology. A lot of people, before they've had a chance to actually operate one, they think they don't have much pickup, they're not going to work in the snow, things like that. And what we found is, people have that opportunity to try it out, talk to their friends or neighbors who maybe have one. It really provides a great boost to that purchase consideration.
Dave, do you have a sense of the people that currently have one that are willing to maintain the car for their next purchase to keep it as an EV? Because with the incentives all wiped out, you feel like that's going to take it in, or I don't know if that's like something that you look at.
Yeah, I don't have data on that. I have sort of anecdotal information that we do have customer support. People do call and ask, what's going on with the incentive? Are they coming back? And we say, we don't know, of course. It will rely on your work here, among others. So I know some of those folks have said, I can't do it without the incentive. And maybe they had a lease for 2 or 3 years, the lease is coming due. And so they're not able to do it. Other people, maybe they once they make the switch, they know that, they don't want to go back to a gasoline powered vehicle because of, the performance, the quiet, all the benefits.
Sure. Representative Wells?
Matt Coder already told us that those incentives barely raise the needle, and he reiterated that in the front page story the other day at the Galloway Record. They barely help.
I haven't seen the article. I mean, I think we have data that says they do help. So the state.
I'm sure they help just some, but they don't move the needle much, he said. You're getting about 14% right now, and maybe they raise them a percentage, but
Yeah, so
that's pretty clear.
Yeah, I think there's a diversity of opinions. So I've certainly talked to people who, the incentives were critical to their purchase decision. I do understand, with the clean cars regulations ramping up, the dealers and automakers are very concerned about the 2020 model year 2026, I guess it is, requirement that automakers will be operating under. And, I think there's a lot of uncertainty about the federal incentives, which I can talk a little bit more about later, in terms of that, those are $7,500, the state incentives. Somebody who could qualify for an all-electric lower income incentive is up to $5,000, and replace a ride could be another $5,000. So people who could take full advantage of up to $17,000 off a brand new vehicle, it made for very attractive deals. So for those people, it did move the needle, I believe, but I do appreciate, certainly there are other perspectives.
Representative Burke and then, Katie.
Well, I'm one of those people that it moved the needle for. But I also want to, looking at the graph, when we started doing the incentives, or when we started doing the incentives, that's when things started to go up the curve. What year did we start this? 2019?
Yeah, somewhere around there, yeah.
Yeah.
Time flies, but yeah.
Yeah.
It's around there. Representative Casey?
The batteries, there's some dirty business with the batteries, isn't there?
So I think what you're referring to is cobalt is one of the ingredients that goes into some of the batteries, not all of the batteries. And a lot of the cobalt is coming from the Democratic Republic of Congo,
Yeah.
which has significant human rights problems. So automakers, it's the same cobalt is in your smartphone, it's in laptop batteries, it's common across lithium-ion battery technology.
But there's a lot more of it in a car.
There is, but there are new battery technologies. Lithium iron phosphate doesn't use any cobalt. And that is what a number of automakers, Ford, Tesla, are using those. And it saves the automakers money, but it also saves on the use of cobalt. There are also newer battery technologies coming out that are called solid state batteries. They're not in the market yet, but over the next 2 or 3 years, we expect to start seeing that. They should provide significant reductions in the use of cobalt. So it's very concerning, but it's also something that industry is very aware of and taking measures to
We're
respond
incentivizing it.
to.
We're incentivizing it. We're incentivizing child labor.
Let's not go down that path.
No, let's not. Let's
Well,
not.
or not. He's not here to testify on that, but we'll move on. Representative Couch.
Yeah, I could say, originally 8 years ago, the incentive helped me sort of buy that first one. It's like, but I would argue incentives are there to move the market, to get it going, get some demand, to sort of get things moving. And is it fair to say, or are you seeing the prices get more, that cost curve coming down so that now your decision is not necessarily a cost decision? It's, do I want electric or do I want,
I think it depends on the vehicle. So we are seeing costs come down on some vehicles, but more commonly what we're seeing is automakers are providing more capability for the same price. So maybe the price isn't coming down, but instead of 80 miles of range in an early Nissan Leaf, we're now getting 200 plus miles of range. So, there's those economies and improvements in the technology that are being passed through to the consumers. So I do have some information from the Vermont Auto Dealers Association Vehicle Index data. And on the bottom of this is toward the end of my slide deck. This is showing monthly sales of all electric and plug-in hybrid vehicles. You can see in October, things peaked. And that was the end of the state incentive programs in October. The federal incentives that continue to be available. And we see both new and used sales have decreased since those incentives were taken out of the consideration of the market. Not everybody in Vermont who's bought EVs has been eligible for those state incentives because there are income requirements. So it's certainly not the only thing that's driving sales. And auto sales in Vermont do tend to be somewhat seasonal. So we won't know for, I think, several more months, the exact impact of, how the incentives are, or the lack of incentives are changing things. But we also see on the line chart to the right, that's just market share over time. And the blue and gray, blue is all electric and gray is plug-in hybrid vehicles. And we have seen over, the last, since 2020, 2021, we've seen significant increase in market share. It's still well below what automakers may need to hit. So I appreciate the concerns that are out there. But, incentives have been a factor in helping drive that increased uptake in market share.
Representative Whiteman.
So just with respect to Representative Wells, I heard, I interpreted Matt Coda's testimony a little differently, and I recall him saying incentives absolutely do make a difference. So I just wanted to share that, and also to say, if we have time at the end of your presentation, I would welcome going back to slide 5 and just talking through a little bit more what goes into those different bar colors, because I think that would be helpful for all of us. Anyway, so thank you.
Yeah, you talked about the winter and some people were worried about it. Well, I actually had never driven one until Saturday. I tried one of the Mustangs. And Mark Hayes, the owner up there, reminded me that when you do get cold weather, 20 above and on down, he said that Mustang will go about 280 miles. It goes about 150 when it's cold. It loses half of its range, which makes it a tough sell for New England and Vermont in particular.
Yeah, winter it's a major issue for the current battery technology. The newer batteries that are coming in solid state that I mentioned should have less of an impact. But even within the batteries that we have, they have improved significantly over the last several years. So
I figured they were 5 years away from having that worked out.
yeah. It's, I could say as somebody who's been driving EVs for over 10 years now, I originally had a Nissan Leaf with 84 miles of range. And when I would come to Montpelier in winter, I had to make sure I charge it because I couldn't get home without some juice in cold weather in particular. And now I have a vehicle that has 260 miles of range. And, on the coldest Vermont days, it's maybe 130.
That's fair. Yeah.
Which is more than most people need for their daily travel. Now, there are people who need more, or if they do a lot of long distance travel, it may just not be a good fit. Maybe a plug-in hybrid be a better option. So we do certainly provide information about those plug-in hybrid options because some people just, it's hard, especially if it's the only vehicle in their household. They may not be ready as, concerns about public charging, things like that. But it's important for people to know that they will see less range. And that is something that we talk about in our resources.
If that EV is housed in a warm garage, does that affect it, or is it as soon as it gets outside?
It helps some, and one of the keys is to you can preheat the vehicle while it's still plugged in, so you don't hit the battery immediately with keeping the cabin warm. Some EVs actually have heat pumps, which are more efficient down to maybe 10, 15 degrees. And if you use the heated seats and heated steering wheels, which many EVs have, those are much more efficient than running the cabin heat. So, there's things you can do if you're really trying to stretch your range. A lot of people, they just don't need to think about it because they still have plenty of range for their kind of day-to-day travel and they're charging at home overnight. But yeah, it's a little bit different from a gasoline car. Gasoline cars are less efficient in winter too, but most people just it doesn't show up in the same way for them.
Yeah. Representative Patson, Burke.
I just want to add, driving slowly really makes a difference. Like we can get places by using less electricity than there are miles if we're driving like 60 miles an hour.
Yeah,
So
great point.
Senator Pouch?
And so, what we're talking about is range and, lower range in the winter, which is absolutely true. And incentives. Do you have data or a feel about what I'm starting to think is if you can't charge at home, that is maybe the biggest barrier for somebody to buy an EV, where if hey, I get home, charge it, I got a full charge, and I got plenty to get to work and back and drop the kids off and all that. How much of that on the inability to charge at an apartment or a condo or even your home is you know, prevents people from making the investment?
Yeah, it's very significant, I would say. People who can't charge at home, it just makes it a lot more challenging to have an electric vehicle today. And that's why the state has been investing in multifamily charging programs, and public charging. Public charging can fill that need for some people, depending on where they're at. The city of Burlington received a federal grant for a very significant increase in public charging in the city that, will be concentrated, or will have opportunities for some of the areas with lots of multifamily housing to have more public charging. Sure, they'd be happy to come speak on that. But it's really challenging if you can't plug in. And for some people, all they need is a standard outlet. It's for an all-electric vehicle, if you're driving more than like 40 miles a day, it's really good to have the higher power, what we call level 2, 240-volt charger. But a lot of people can make do, especially with a plug-in hybrid, if they can just have a standard outlet. So that is an opportunity that some people aren't aware of, but we do need to continue to, in my opinion, support multifamily charging, because there's this issue of, especially for renters, they don't really necessarily want to make the investment. It can be significant to install the higher powered charging. And if they're going to be out in a year or two, it just doesn't really make sense. And landlords may not want to put the money into it either. So having the state funding programs is really helpful to advance EV ownership.
Representative.
Yeah, how much is the investment to, let's say I wanted to buy an EV and I wanted to install level 2 at my house? What does that look like?
It really ranges. So it's a hard question to answer for an individual without knowing their situation. So we always recommend people consult an electrician for detailed information. Some automakers have actually been providing, like Ford has a program where if you're getting a Ford EV, they'll actually give you like $1,000 toward a home charging install. It can range anywhere from, I would say, kind of $200-$300 to $1,000 plus. And by $1,000 plus, that might be some of the utilities. You may have smaller transformers, so that may need to actually upgrade a transformer that serves multiple sort of neighbors or people on the street. And in some utilities, that cost is borne by the customer, and others it's we call rate-based, where the customer doesn't pay for that cost, the utility covers it, and it's sort of absorbed by their full ratepayer base. So that cost can be very significant if somebody runs into that, or if they need to upgrade their electric panel, and that can be several $1,000s. Sometimes people might need to, like if they're thinking about a heat pump and an EV, there may be some panel upgrade costs, and there is a panel upgrade program funded with some federal dollars that the state has worked with a number of partners to launch recently. I don't have a lot of information on it. It's more focused, I think, on sort of the heat pump side, but I think EVs can also benefit through some of that funding that's available. Representative White, I don't want to, which slide were you said slide 5, so I just want to make sure.
Page 5, it was the bar. Okay. There's a slide with vertical, okay, here it is.
Batteries.
EV emission reductions.
This one.
Yeah, so I just thought it'd be helpful to talk us through this slide, because it's a little confusing, because you've got 2024
Sure.
ICEs, which are,
Sure.
okay,
Yes. Gas. Yeah.
versus,
So the US is sort of at the middle one there on the left. Let's see if I can kind of circle it on the screen for you. So this is the US average sort of grid emissions. So average generation US, Vermont's grid is somewhat cleaner. So that's why the bars get lower for the electricity production, the sort of top part of the bar that's that kind of yellow color. That gets much thinner because there's a higher share of low carbon renewable generation from Vermont's grid. So
Much cleaner grid compared to.
right, and then the battery manufacturer is that sort of magenta purple color, and then vehicle manufacturers, everything else besides the battery, essentially, that is somewhat similar across gas and electric. And then the right side is showing the future grid as Vermont's grid and the US grid continue to get cleaner. Those numbers continue to improve. And this is taken from an Energy Action Network publication, their latest annual report. It has a wealth of information on energy issues in Vermont.
And assuming just,
No,
sorry. So when we're looking at the different colors of the bars, like for example, the battery manufacturer in purple, is that taking into account some of what Representative Casey was talking about, like?
It's taken into consideration the emissions. It won't necessarily reflect the full cost of, any human rights issues and things like that, which obviously are very concerning and something that the industry is
Okay,
taking
so
steps
that's
to
not
address.
reflected on this chart.
This is purely greenhouse gas emissions.
Okay. Thank you.
Representative House?
and I think if you look at the chart, you can see the future. You see the gas vehicles, they drop down just a little bit. I think just because. they're
Efficiency gains.
continuing, get more efficient.
All right, Representative Wells, and we probably gotta move on. We've got a lot more slides to go
Well,
through
this is
here.
a popular subject. What about the harm to local dealers? The Sid Toll says in his argument here, the dealers fear the fallout from forced adoption of electrical vehicles will force layoffs and stuff because they can't sell these products that they're forced to sell. What do you think?
I think dealers are incredibly important local businesses in Vermont. I have some information if we have time. I want to spend a little time talking about the ways that we're trying to support them in this transition. Some people have said that dealers, not necessarily in this room, but in the country, Sierra Club has done some research looking at dealers across the country, and some of them are not providing great information to their customers and things like that about EVs, or not making the necessary investments. And in Vermont, most dealers that I talk to are, very receptive, but they don't want to get ahead of the customer. So, they recognize that consumer demand is an important ingredient to their success. And, they want automakers and other partners. I think the incentives I've understood they feel are important, but also things like public charging infrastructure, some of the multifamily charging investments that we've talked about are also important. There's been talk, EVs do tend to require less maintenance, and service is a big part of dealer revenue. But dealers I've talked to, EVs still have winter tire changeovers. There's still some issues that can happen. There have been a number of recalls, which maybe aren't hitting the customers' pocketbooks, but dealers do get income from the automakers for warranty service claims. So I don't think at this point we haven't seen that dealers have been severely disadvantaged. Now that may change as those requirements continue to ramp up if the market doesn't keep pace. And there certainly are going to be more opportunities. First of all, there's a number of flexibilities to those programs that I think, I'm not qualified to go on to speak at length on, but I know the folks from the Agency of Natural Resources have come in and talked about some of those flexibilities that manufacturers have to meet the requirements. And, I think certainly if things aren't going well with those programs, dealers will not be shy about sharing their opinions about what needs to change. So hopefully, we'll find a path forward that works for everybody.
Thanks.
So I'm gonna see where we're at here. Got the pace a little bit. Just sort of talking a little bit more specifically about our Drive Electric Vermont program support. So a lot of things happening around EVs, lots of different programs, lots of state agencies involved, utilities involved, other non-governmental organizations involved. So we do try to, through our work as Drive Electric Vermont, we have quarterly stakeholder meetings where we can, provide information out to basically everybody in the state who has an interest in these programs and figuring out what's happening with charging or the incentives or other issues of that sort. So, we're sort of calling it carrots, sticks, and megaphones, right? So you got the carrots of the incentives, the sticks of the regulations, and then megaphones are the sort of glue that kind of keeps things together. It's still really critical to making sure that, consumers are aware of the incentives or, what happens in winter and things of that sort. So that's where our Drive Electric work has been focused. We know that a lot of people rely on online resources for, their car sort of research and shopping. So we've invested quite a bit in updating the Drive Electric Vermont website. Actually, major sort of redo of the site launched last month, which is tailored to kind of respond to some of the questions that we're getting. We're getting more questions from businesses, so we have more resources for businesses and municipalities. We have sort of additional capabilities for filtering and incentive information. And we know from folks like JD Power is quoted here that, prioritizing these efforts to educate consumers is really critical, because if you have an incentive but nobody knows about it, then it's really not doing the job that we hope it will. We have sort of handouts and resources. We have been making sure to provide translated materials when appropriate. The new website has a translation button that's more front and center. We want to make sure anybody who can take advantage of these programs is getting the information they need. This is just kind of running through what it might look like for somebody when those incentive programs were active. So this is how incentives could be stacked. The red lines are the state programs that aren't currently operating. It's a Chevy Equinox. It's $33,600 is the base MSRP for that model, which is significantly lower. The average, I don't know how many of you have been in the market for a new car in the last couple of years, but the average selling price is, as of January, I think $48,000 for a new vehicle now. So affordability is challenging, for in the market for a new car, which is why so many folks buy used cars. It's about 2/3 of the Vermont market. But we are seeing increased interest in used EVs, but we also know we need to get more new EVs to kind of prime that supply. So there's more of them out there for people to get in the secondary marketplace. So, in any case, if somebody could qualify for all of those programs when they were active, a lower income person with less than 60,000 income could get a new Equinox for just under $13,000. Leases, could be under $200 a month with nothing down for some of these vehicles. So really some, for not every EV is going to be this affordable, obviously. I mean, there's, just like in gasoline cars, you have some high-end models that are more luxury, more features, capabilities. But the Equinox does have an option for all-wheel drive, which we've heard from a lot of Vermonters that's a critical purchase consideration if they're doing a lot of long-distance travel. So we provide a lot of technical assistance. We have a phone center and an online chat on our website that people can access if they have a question about incentives or charging or, any of the variety of things that can come up. Supporting businesses and municipalities. We're supporting those state funding programs for charging. We're supporting the state of Vermont on some of the federal funding opportunities. Hopefully those funds will start to flow again. I know there's a lot of uncertainty about the path forward for those, but I do think it's really important that those dollars continue to build out that public charging infrastructure that we really need. We've also done some work to support VTrans's public transit section on their zero emission transit plan. So we've helped them write some grants for electric buses, the federal grants that have been received, done some charging work with some of the bus providers, things of that sort. And so, we're seeing success, I would say, although maybe not at the pace that we would all like to see. But significant gains in EV adoption over the last, particularly since COVID, sort of hit a low point with COVID. The market really tightened up. And it took a while for the supply chain to come back from that. It's still maybe not quite fully recovered, but it's really greatly improved. And so since then, we've seen very significant gains over the last 2 years or so. So that's the genesis or sort of the basis for our funding request. We'd like to continue doing this work. There's more detail on some of the metrics in the letter that I provided, which is linked here, also on the committee page. And, I do have more slides on the work that Efficiency Vermont has been doing and some industry information, but maybe I'll just pause there and take the temperature of the room, how much time you want to spend on this or questions.
We talk about EVs and greenhouse gas emissions and, I didn't see any slides about the cost of ownership, which I sort of tout that it really is an affordability issue, the overall cost of driving per mile. Do you have any slides like that?
I did not prepare slides on that front. I know it came up in some of the A&R testimony, I think, at least on the Senate side, and they did provide some information. We do have a resource on the Drive Electric Vermont website. The trick is that it can be really challenging because there are different utility rates, there are off-peak charging rates, there's different vehicles. So, we tend to say, you will save, most people in Vermont will save on fuel, especially if they can access one of those off-peak utility rates, which brings the cost equivalent down to a little over $1 a gallon for gasoline sort of equivalent.
But even in the worst case, you have to pay the regular rate. There's no off-peak, the cost comparison. Do you have?
Yeah, well, I don't have a slide, but I'm happy to follow up with more information on that. And we do have, as I said, a resource on the Drive Electric website that I can also share. We used to have a calculator, but it just talked about the fuel cost savings. And we felt like that wasn't necessarily doing, because there are a lot of other considerations. There's insurance, maintenance, depreciation, and all of these things that kind of go into the full cost of ownership of any vehicle. And so we try to run through how that can change. Even obviously the registration costs have gone up a bit. So that's a consideration for some people. So we do have information, but trying to pin it down to an exact number, trying to kind of put people to think about it critically, but not necessarily say you will save, whatever the number is. Typically, it might be $5,000 to $10,000 over the life of a vehicle, according to Consumer Reports. But
to a gas vehicle really depends on what your gas mileage is, and that has variation.
Exactly.
I think my point being, from everything I know, if you just take the worst case, you're still going to find a significant overall savings
for the vast majority of people. I mean, I think for a small number of people, if they are driving a Prius now and they're in a utility area that has relatively high rates and they don't have access to an off-peak rate, they may not see those same level of savings. But certainly for most people in Vermont, see very significant savings.
Yeah, I mean, it's up to we got 8 more minutes. I don't know if you just want to add anything or if we have any more questions. Or, if you want to go long too, I get 10 out of 4, but I mean, Phil can run the ship. It's up to you. We're here for a little bit.
Yeah, well, I'm here for you. So,
Is there any more questions?
Yeah, I got one. Electrical grid, can it take all these new cars that you're hoping you're going to sell over the next few years? Obviously, we're not going to hit any of those goals. We're going to continue to be sued. That was a great deal right there. We're already being sued now. Take it. Can the grid take it in the long run?
So, encourage you to talk to some of the utilities who have programs on this front, or the Public Utility Commission. My understanding is, particularly with the utilities offering programs to move charging to off-peak, it's really the peak issues that are the concern at this, for the, basically foreseeable future. And there's quite a bit of capacity for most of the grid if charging is happening off peak. And utilities that have these programs, they, basically pass through the value of those savings to customers with lower rates, off-peak rates. And many customers take advantage of those, and, it's a win-win, basically, for Vermont and the utilities and the drivers. So, there may need to be some investments in the grid, and just writ large as far as transmission upgrades or things like that, as more people think about electrifying heat pumps and EVs. But the information that I have is that basically, and certainly for the near term, as long as we're doing what we can to make sure charging is happening off peak, that the concerns are minimal.
Thanks.
So I can maybe run through a little bit of what Efficiency Vermont is doing, and then we'll see where we're at. So, historically, Efficiency Vermont is, working to reduce electric use. So even though EVs are more efficient, they are increasing electric use. So EVs and heat pumps, more efficient, lower greenhouse gas emissions, but increasing electric use. So historically, it hasn't really fallen under the purview of what Efficiency Vermont does as an energy efficiency utility. That changed in 2020 with a pilot program that was passed by the legislature that allowed them to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the thermal energy, so home heating, heating realm and transportation sector. There's some guardrails on how those funds could be spent. It's not to support down consumer incentive programs, but where Efficiency Vermont basically ended up with their programs is focusing on the supply chain, so dealer programs and consumer awareness and education as a marketing campaign. So dealer program has 51 participating dealers across the state, which is maybe about half of the new car dealers. They get benefits in terms of funding support for putting in charging infrastructure. If they need to buy specialized equipment to service EVs, they can get some funding support to help cover that. There's the possibility that, if they have, they want to have some EV marketing materials in their showroom, they can support that. So it's really just designed to help them sell more electric vehicles and overcome some of the barriers that might have. It does include a dealer incentive program. It's capped at 50 sales per dealer per year. It's providing what we call a midstream incentive or a spiff. So dealers and the salespeople who are working with customers, maybe they need to take a little bit more time to work with the customer. So it's helping, motivate and support those activities among dealers. So it includes a training requirement. So we've had over 100 sales staff at dealers participate in those training sessions. At 40 dealers, this is over the first program period for 2021 to 2023. 40 dealers receiving those sales incentives, 30 readiness projects, so things like charging and supporting about 1,200, a little over 1,200 EVs. There's a little more information on the marketing campaign. We did see significant increase in traffic to the Drive Electric from our website as a result of that campaign when it was active. And they're now in the second program period, which is still working on this consumer awareness campaign. The specific focus in this round is thinking about used car dealers. And, a lot of new car dealers sell used cars. They actually make pretty good money on those, more margin in the used car market. But there's also a lot of smaller Vermont dealers who don't sell new cars, who are used car dealers exclusively. And so that's what I'm referring to when I'm talking about used car dealerships here, trying to understand their needs and think about, where they can source EV from regional auctions or other sources. And, basically provide some support because we know those requirements that are coming down from OEMs can be challenging. So I just have, we talked about this information a little bit. Happy to dive into more detail on some of the industry trends. One, I did mention that used vehicles are about 2/3 of Vermont's annual sales. So we recognize that, it's one of the reasons we're thinking about used car dealers and what the opportunities are and what support they might need. Federal EV tax credits, I'll leave this as a reference for you. I won't get into the details unless folks have questions and want to dive into it. But one thing I would just call out is that one of the eligibility requirements is if there are critical materials, so things like cobalt in the batteries, that they have to come from a country that we have an agreement with, or use materials that have been recycled from batteries. So thinking about as we get more EVs on the road, having that full life cycle as the batteries come out of vehicles, and so far they've been holding up very well. Expect to see basically most EV batteries last the life of the vehicle, which we weren't so sure about in the early days. But as as a vehicle ages and comes out of, active use, we want to make sure those batteries aren't going into a landfill. And so making sure that they're recycled and those valuable materials are being reused is important. And, just to wrap up then, we know affordability remains a challenge. It's improving, but it's still a challenge. We know that most people are charging at home, but there's certainly a need for more public charging. We see that in feedback that we get in our work, and reliability also needs to improve. We feel that our work is continuing to provide important connections across the industry. And, this sort of education outreach work remains really critical. And the Efficiency Vermont program's also been really helpful to supporting the marketplace. And, just sort of a future thing to be thinking about is how EVs can actually support the grid and support grid resiliency. As power outages are a concern for some folks, you can actually use EVs to power your home. Not every EV necessarily has this capability, but a growing number of them do. And it's can be a really valuable tool for some households if they have access to that. So that's all I had. Happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thanks. Are there any last minute questions?
I'd just like to know how you do that. How do you use EV to power your home?
So there are different ways. So some vehicles like the Hyundai and Kia vehicles have what's called a vehicle to load functionality. You basically just have an outlet on the vehicle, and you can run, say you want to run your fridge or your boiler or something like that, just a few things. You can just run an extension cord from the vehicle in. If somebody's thinking, if they get a lot of outages or have the money to invest in a more robust system, Ford has basically an automated transfer, kind of like people might have with a generator, where if the power goes out, it'll sense it and it can switch over, and you can, power your house, it's a higher power connection essentially than just an extension cord. It's a, heavy duty, higher current connection that can power maybe not your entire house again, but critical loads for a number of days. Of course, at some point, you're going to have to charge the vehicle. And that's, you can get a lot out of, some of these batteries in the Fords or the pickup trucks are quite large. So you can actually get quite a bit of juice out of them for a period of time. But, that's where having charging infrastructure in place across the state, will be a boon to making sure that people can continue to take advantage of that in extended outage situations.
Keep your car charged up, right? So
That's the motto, always be charging, ABC. If you have an EV, always be charging. So you're not left stuck.
Right. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. Very informative.
Thank you.
So we'll be ending, and we start